So we thank Tobias for joining us in studio. They're just now talking about his difficulties on campus and his very inspiring resistance to the anti-life agendas among student bodies. On a wider note, we are joined by the head of the Scottish Catholic Media Office, Peter Kearney, who for many years now has worked alongside the bishops and in Catholic media to discuss these issues of life. And quite frankly, Peter has seen a lot of change in that time, and we're going to chat to Peter today about the change. So Peter, thank you for coming in. My mind goes back to 10, maybe 15 years ago now, when the situation was markedly different for this debate. Just to let people know, we are doing a wee project with yourself about backing up VHS tapes. And one of the things we saw is that in the mid-90s, we're watching discussion programmes about life topics such as abortion, euthanasia, etc. The tone is so respectful on both sides, and there was a free chair to express those views, whereas now it feels like the conversation's been shut down. So what have you noticed in the last?
I think that's true on life issues, on the particular issue of abortion, the debate, the discussion on abortion, as it is across many issues. And I think what's happened is the cancel culture, which has become unbelievably intolerant, has seeped into almost every aspect of public debate. If you think back to 2010, 13 years ago, we had the visit, September 16th, 2010, of Pope Benedict XVI. And one of his themes was what he called the tyranny of tolerance. It was where people don't truly respect tolerance, but what they do is they try to impose a false tolerance by deciding who can and can't say certain things and what you can and can't say. And there's absolutely no question that over that period, and he predicted this, the boundaries of debate have shrunk quite dramatically, almost to the point now where some people are simply not allowed to say certain things. We've seen it maybe at its most vociferous in the debate over gender and the transgender question, where it is a combination of things. It's intimidation, sometimes it is even violence, if only verbal violence, but it's also a very chilling climate. The effect is for people to feel, I can't talk about this, I won't say anything. And I do worry that to a degree that has happened in the life debate as well, where people are now scared to question the existence of abortion or the legislation that governs the provision of abortion. And we potentially have an accident there with the possibility in Scotland for the first time ever of a piece of legislation that would criminalise objections to abortion.
That is absolutely one of the things we want to talk about, and we have been talking about this weekend with various people, this idea of buffer zones. Now, the majority of our viewership are Catholic, and majority of them, I would hope, are pro-life. Some aren't. Some Catholics who maybe are against abortion are for buffer zones, in the sense that this idea that women who are accessing medical treatment, as they would call it, medical treatment or other things, are being harassed outside hospitals. Now, for the record, I've covered in my work as at Sancta some of these vigils, and there's been absolutely no evidence whatsoever of what's been alleged. What's your view on that?
That's actually a matter of fact. There is no evidence of anyone being prevented or even curtailed when it comes to approaching a hospital when an abortion's being carried out. Interestingly, there's a consultation running at the moment on this private members bill. It's come from an MSP called Gillian Mackay. She's a Green MSP, and she's put forward a buffer zone bill where certain things would become illegal, they become criminal within a zone. The zone would be a 200-metre wide zone around premises that provide an abortion. Consultations are open to anyone. Anyone can respond to them, anyone can reply to them. What is interesting is Police Scotland did not respond to this consultation. Now, that would tend to suggest that insofar as the police are concerned, there is not a public order problem that has to be solved. And so the question really for the people in favour of this is, what exactly is it you're trying to stop? It's also worth noting, no one has been arrested outside an abortion facility in Scotland for assault, for breach of the peace, for intimidation. Before you begin to tackle a problem, normally in politics, the first thing we ask is, can we define the problem? What is it that we're trying to tackle? And as you have just said, there isn't. I would make the point, we sometimes talk about taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. I think what this bill would do is it would bring an enormous sledgehammer to crack an invisible nut.
I mean, one of the things I always say is that in this age of instant media with mobile phones, you can take out your phone if you're feeling aggressed by someone and film them and say, stand back, I'm filming this. There is no videos of any so-called protester or whatever you want to call them. We call them, you know, they're praying. It's a vigil. There's no evidence whatsoever of anyone being harassed. So it's almost as if it's make-believe, because I find it hard to believe there would not be footage if it was alleged.
Well, of course there would be. But we also need to, in a sense, ask another question. Even if there was some footage of people being loud and, noisy and vociferous in the protests, we do need to ask, if that existed, which, as you rightly say, it doesn't, should that be grounds for saying these people can't express their opinions? Because what we need to do is take a step back and say, we're protected. We live in a democracy and we're protected by certain fundamental rights. And if we look to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, upon which so much of our law is based here when it comes to the protection of human rights, Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was accepted and proclaimed by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1948, in Article 18 it says, we all have the right to freedom of expression. We have the right to express ourselves, to express our views, and to disseminate them, and to hear the views of other people. It doesn't say you have to agree with them, and it doesn't say you have to like them if you hear someone else expressing a view, but we're all allowed to express them. There's been a big debate recently over protest marches and demonstrations round about the situation in Gaza and the fact that it overlapped with the weekend of the Remembrance Sunday. And the point that the police made there was that we don't have the authority or the power just to stop people expressing themselves. Now, many people agreed with what was being said, many people disagreed with what was being said, but we do need to step back from that and say, leave the two sides for a moment and just answer this question. Should people be allowed to express their views in public? Should they be allowed to do that? And I hope most people would say, yes, they should.
I mean, what's the fallout from that? I mean, I'm looking at it, it's not currently law in Scotland yet. There has been some sporadic places in England where it's become law, buffer zones. And I think of the case of Isabel von Spruce, who was arrested for standing. And the police asked her, what are you thinking about? And she said, I may or may not be thinking about abortion. She was arrested for being there. Could that potentially happen here?
Absolutely. Now, let's be absolutely clear about this. This is not... Some people listening to this might think that can't happen. Surely not. You couldn't stop someone. The police couldn't arrest someone because of what they were thinking in the silence of their own head. Yes, they could, to be completely clear. The Gillian Mackay proposal in the guidance notes says that there are certain things which would be illegal within this 200-mile zone, which, by the way, might include your own home, if you happen to live 200 metres away from a facility. Things that people might expect, such as shouting or protesting. But as you go down the list, it also says praying audibly and silently. So we would be in what I would describe as an almost through the looking glass surreal world, where the police would be asking people, what are you thinking? If your thoughts are acceptable to the law, you can keep thinking them. If they're not acceptable, we'll arrest you. So what we will have done, if this was to be passed, for the first time in our history, we would have created a thought crime. And I would say to people, this is much, much more of a worry and much, much more of a possibility than you might think. I'll give you an example. Last year, there was a case in the UK Supreme Court where the Northern Ireland Assembly was being judged by the Supreme Court justices as to whether or not it had the legislative competence to pass something similar. And the question was being asked, are they able to do this? The Scottish Government took a particular interest in that case because it related to the legislative competence of a devolved body. And they sent Dorothy Bain, the senior law officer in Scotland, the Lord Advocate, and she spoke to the justices prior to the deliberations. What she said was absolutely chilling. She said that if a woman was approaching an abortion facility and heard people shouting, which, to be clear, we have said doesn't actually happen in this country, but take the example of hearing someone shouting, that would be disturbing. But she went on to say it would be much more disturbing if someone stood in silence, as she said, judging them. She actually suggested that that would be more psychologically damaging than having someone shout at you or hold up a placard or a banner. Now, this is tortuous logic on a pretty big scale. And if we follow it through, and if we get to the point, her culmination of her argument was simply, since it's more damaging to stand in silent judgment, as she described it, the punishment should be greater because you've done more harm. We could end up in a bizarre inverted world where people in demonstrations decide better to hurl abuse and scream and shout in the hope you'll get a lower sentence later because you're not standing in silent judgment. Now, as I say, this may sound preposterous, it may even sound fictitious, but this is exactly what the Lord Advocate said to the justices in the Supreme Court last year, and it is exactly the basis on which this proposed buffer zone bill is based.
I mean, I'm hearing that for the first time myself. Obviously, I've some awareness of the buffer zone background, but that quote, in particular from Dorothy Bain, and the implications, it's mental gymnastics. And I'm thinking here, most viewers here will be shocked by it because they might have this kind of cosy notion over it's only to protect women going to the hospital. The ramifications of that going forward, effectively criminalising prayer, not even vocal prayer, silent prayer, where does that lead to?
Well, it begs a number of questions. For example, a lot of Catholics will be familiar with the vigils that have taken place over many years outside the Trident nuclear base at Faslane, or for that matter, outside the Dungavel Detention Centre, which housed asylum seekers. And Catholics and other Christians have been involved in those. Faslane, for example, is effectively silent witness. The people stand there saying, I just want by my presence to show that I don't agree with what happens here. Now, the people who serve in that base, the people who work in that base, the contractors who are travelling in and out of that base must pass the protesters. I use the protesters word very, very loosely here. They are not in favour of what's happening, but they're neither aggressive or violent in any way. Sometimes they're actually silent. But it could be argued that someone going past them into the base is upset or irritated by the fact that they're even there. We don't know. That's certainly never been tested in court. But if the government said, we want to make that sort of vigil illegal, I hope most people would be up in arms and say, that's absolutely unreasonable. It's a massive invasion of our human rights and it must be stopped. So I would just urge people, if you haven't thought about this, take the concept of a silent vigil away from the topic of abortion and apply it elsewhere. For example, it's now been 2 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At the early months of that, there was a silent vigil of pro-Ukrainian supporters in George Square in Glasgow. All they did was stand with some banners in the middle of the square every day. They spoke to people who went by and they just bore witness to the fact that they supported Ukraine and they opposed what had happened. And I often thought, what if one day the Russian consul who's in Edinburgh took the train to Glasgow, got off at Queen Street and walked across George Square and saw them? Well, there's a good chance that he might not like the fact that they were there. He might not like what their banners said. He might not like what they said. Should that mean that he has the right to have them arrested, to have them removed, to have them cancelled? Again, I would hope most people would say, absolutely not. They have a right to express that view. So again, I say to people, please take this concept of cancelling, of silencing people, and put it in other contexts, and then say, is this fair?
Exactly. I mean, that is one of the things that SPUC are doing currently just now, is fighting in the courts and the political scene against buffer zones and raising awareness. What is the church doing and the level of the bishops regards this kind of battle for freedom of expression?
Our parliamentary office and our parliamentary officer are constantly lobbying, communicating and working with MSPs and with the Scottish Government. Now, officially, this buffer zone bill is a private member's bill. However, the private MSP does have the support of the Scottish Government. So we are keen to stress to the Scottish Government that they shouldn't give their support to this. And to stress to all MSPs who will have a vote on the matter, this is an absolute invasion of people's human rights. But that has to be done on as wide a basis as possible. So the message I would say to everyone who's listening to this is really, really simple. Please contact your MSP and simply say to them, I do not want this destruction basically of human rights, of freedom of expression. I don't think it's merited, it's absolutely not necessary, and can you assure me that you will not support it? They can contact their MSP through the Scottish Parliament very, very easily, and the details on this are available on the Catholic Parliamentary Office page, and I'm sure you'll be able to show people a link to that.
Yep. As Peter said, it's very important that you contact your MSP. We have the link below, and if anyone wants any further details, you can message us privately and we'll send you those links and contacts. Thanks, Peter, for coming in today to our Sancta Showcase for Life. It's been a long weekend. It's been a long weekend so far, but we're united as Catholics to defend life from all stages, from womb to tomb. And you've done a great job of doing that over the years as well. So thank you for doing that and coming in.
Thanks very much for having me, John.
Okay, God bless.
Thank you, God bless.